The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of what I thought was my sanctuary. Sarah's words hung in the air like poison, each syllable cutting deeper than broken glass ever could. Everything I believed about my life, about my success, about this $2 million dream I'd worked 15 years to achieve, crumbled in that single moment. But let me start from the beginning, because endings only make sense when you understand how desperately I wanted this beginning. I remember the first time I saw the house on Magnolia Drive. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and the realtor was 20 minutes late. I stood on the cobblestone driveway, staring up at the colonial facade with its perfect white columns and black shutters, feeling something I hadn't experienced since childhood: pure, unadulterated want, not need, not desire, but that primal wanting that makes your chest tight and your hands shake. The house was everything I'd dreamed of since I was 12 years old. Living in our cramped apartment above the bakery where Mom worked double shifts, I used to walk through the wealthy neighborhoods after school, pressing my nose against the windows of houses just like this one, promising myself that someday I'd have my own version of perfect. Someday, I'd prove that the kid from the wrong side of town could make it. 15 years of 70-hour weeks, climbing from junior analyst to senior partner at Morrison & Associates, sacrificing relationships, friendships, and sometimes my sanity, all led to this moment. I'd saved every penny, invested wisely, and finally had enough for the down payment on my dream. The mortgage was aggressive, but I could handle it. I'd handled everything life threw at me so far. The house had 6 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and a master suite that overlooked the perfectly manicured garden. But what sold me wasn't the luxury, it was the feeling of belonging I got when I walked through those rooms. For the first time in my adult life, I could picture myself hosting Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, maybe even birthday parties, for the children I hoped to have someday. Sarah was the first person I called after signing the papers. My younger sister had always been my closest confidant, the one person who understood where I came from and what this achievement meant. She screamed so loud over the phone that I had to hold it away from my ear, and I could hear her telling her husband Jake about my news in the background. Emma, oh my God, you did it. You actually did it, she'd said, and I could hear her crying, happy tears. I'm so proud of you. Mom would be so proud. Mom had died 3 years earlier, and not a day passed without me wishing she could see how far I'd come. She'd worked her fingers to the bone to keep Sarah and me fed and clothed, never complaining, never making us feel like we were a burden, even when we clearly were. The house felt like a tribute to her sacrifice, proof that her struggles hadn't been in vain. The next 3 months passed in a blur of moving preparations, interior decorating, and pure excitement. I hired professionals to paint every room, bought furniture that actually matched instead of random pieces from thrift stores and garage sales, and installed the security system I'd always wanted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about whether I could afford something. I was living the dream I'd worked so hard to achieve. Sarah visited every weekend, bringing paint samples and fabric swatches, helping me choose curtains and throw pillows. She seemed almost as invested in the house as I was, which made perfect sense. She'd grown up in the same cramped apartment, shared the same dreams of something better. Seeing me succeed felt like validation that escape was possible, that we weren't doomed to repeat our mother's struggles. The housewarming party was her idea. I'd been hesitant at first. I wasn't much for entertaining, and most of my colleagues felt more like acquaintances than friends. But Sarah insisted that I needed to celebrate properly, to mark this milestone with the people who mattered. She offered to handle all the planning, from the catering to the guest list. And I gratefully accepted. The night of the party, everything was perfect. The house gleamed under the warm lighting. Flower arrangements filled every room with the scent of jasmine and roses. And the caterers had outdone themselves with an elegant spread that looked like something from a magazine. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion, a navy blue cocktail dress that made me feel sophisticated and successful. Looking in the mirror before the guests arrived, I barely recognized the confident woman staring back at me. The doorbell started, ringing at 7 sharp, and soon the house filled with voices and laughter. My colleagues from the firm mingled with Sarah's friends, my neighbors introduced themselves with warm smiles and bottles of wine, and even a few clients I'd grown close to over the years had come to celebrate. I moved through the rooms like I was floating, accepting congratulations and compliments about the house. Feeling truly happy for the first time in years, Sarah was in her element. Playing the perfect hostess, making sure everyone had drinks, and introducing people who didn't know each other. She looked beautiful in a red dress that showed off her figure, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant bun. Jake stood beside her, beaming with pride at his wife's social grace. They made such a perfect couple. High school sweethearts who'd weathered every storm together and come out stronger. Around 9 o'clock. Someone suggested a toast, and suddenly everyone was gathering in the living room, champagne glasses in hand. I felt a flutter of nerves as all eyes turned to me, waiting for words that would somehow capture what this moment meant. How do you explain to a room full of people that this house represents everything you've ever wanted, everything you've ever worked for? Thank you all for being here tonight, I began, my voice slightly shaky. This house isn't just a home to it's proof that dreams really can come true if you're willing to work hard enough. Growing up, my sister Sarah and I didn't have much, but we had big dreams. Standing here now, surrounded by all of you in this beautiful space, I feel like the luckiest person in the world. The room erupted in applause and cheers, and I felt tears pricking at my eyes. This was at the moment I'd been working toward my entire adult life, the validation that I'd made it, that I belonged in spaces like this, that I was worthy of beautiful things. Sarah stepped forward then, raising her own glass. And I expected her to add some sweet sentiment about sisterly pride or childhood dreams. Instead, her expression was strange, not quite sad, not quite angry, but something I couldn't identify. The room fell quiet, sensing that something important was about to happen. Emma, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. My stomach dropped. There was something in her tone, something that made every instinct I had scream danger. The champagne in my glass suddenly tasted sour, and I found myself gripping the stem so tightly I was surprised it didn't snap. Sarah, what's wrong? I asked, trying to keep my voice light, hoping that whatever she was about to say could wait until after the party. Until we were alone. But she was already shaking her head, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I can't keep this secret anymore. It's been eating me alive, and seeing you so happy tonight, knowing what I know, ... double quotes. She paused, taking a shuddering breath. Emma, this house, this money you used to buy it's not really yours. The world tilted sideways. I heard someone gasp, maybe me, maybe someone else in the room. The conversations that had been buzzing around us died completely, leaving only the sound of my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. What are you talking about? I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. Sarah's face crumpled, and the tears started flowing freely now. The inheritance from Mom. The $50,000 she left you never got your half. I kept it all. The champagne glass slipped from my numb fingers, and I watched in slow motion as it fell to the marble floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sound was sharp and final, like the breaking of more than just crystal. Time stopped. The room full of people, my colleagues, my neighbors, people I barely knew but had invited into my most sacred space, became frozen to blow, their faces blurring as my vision tunneled. All I could see was Sarah, my baby sister, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world, standing in my dream home and destroying everything with words that couldn't possibly be true. That's impossible. I heard myself say, my voice sounding strange and distant. We went to the lawyer together. We each got $25,000. I deposited the check myself. Sarah was sobbing now, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. No, Emma, you deposited a check from me. I cashed Mom's entire inheritance and wrote you a check for half. But the inheritance, it was $50,000 total, not $50,000 each. Mom left everything to me. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my knees buckle, and someone, maybe Jake, moved forward, as if to catch me, but I held up a hand to stop them. I needed to process this, needed to understand what she was telling me, while surrounded by dozens of witnesses to my humiliation. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would Mom leave everything to you? Sarah's sobs intensified, and she couldn't meet my eyes. Because I was struggling. Because Jake lost his job right after we got married, and we were about to lose our apartment. Because I called her crying every night about money, and you were already successful, already making good money at the firm. She thought I needed it more. Asterisk, the cruel logic of it cut deep. Of course, Mom would have left the money to Sarah. I'd been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder, proving I could succeed on my own, that I'd probably missed signs that my little sister was drowning. In Mom's eyes, I was the strong one, the one who always figured things out. Sarah was the one who needed protecting. Asterisk, but that didn't explain the deception. The years of lying, the way Sarah had let me believe I'd used my inheritance wisely as part of my down payment calculations. It didn't explain why she'd watched me struggle to save every penny for this house while sitting on money that could have helped. Asterisk, so you kept $25,000 that should have been mine, I said, my voice growing stronger even as my world fell apart. And you let me believe I had used my inheritance responsibly. Asterisk, I meant to tell you, Sarah said desperately. I meant to split it properly, but Jake was so proud, and he made me promise not to tell anyone we needed help. And then you were doing so well, and it seemed like you didn't need it. And as time went on, it got harder and harder to find the right moment. Asterisk, 15 years. Sarah. 15 years you kept this from me. Asterisk, the math was brutal and immediate. $25,000, invested properly over 15 years, would have grown significantly. More importantly, knowing I had that buffer might have changed my entire financial strategy. I might have taken different risks, made different choices, lived a different life. Asterisk, I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me, some shocked, some pitying, some clearly uncomfortable witnessing this family drama. These people had come to celebrate my success, and instead they were watching my world implode in real time. The beautiful house I'd worked so hard for suddenly felt like a lie, a monument to my own ignorance. Asterisk, I need everyone to leave, I said quietly. But my voice carried in the absolute silence of the room. Asterisk, Emma, please, Sarah stepped toward me, but I backed away. Asterisk, everyone needs to leave. Now. Asterisk, the guests began filing out awkwardly, some stopping to whisper words of support or sympathy that I couldn't really hear over the roar in my head. Within minutes, the house was empty except for Sarah, Jake, and me. The silence was deafening after the party noise, broken only by Sarah's continued crying and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Asterisk, Jake cleared his throat uncomfortably. Emma, I think maybe we should talk about this when everyone's had time to. Asterisk, no. My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. We're talking about this now. Sarah, I want you to explain to me exactly how $25,000 that belonged to me ended up funding your life for the past 15 years. Asterisk, Sarah collapsed onto my new sofa, her head in her hands. We used it for the security deposit on our first real apartment. Then Jake's car broke down, and we needed it for repairs so he could get to job interviews. Then I got pregnant with Lily and lost my job, and we used some for medical bills. It disappeared bit by bit, and before I knew it, it was gone. Asterisk, the pregnancy that ended in miscarriage. I remembered that time, how devastated Sarah had been, how Jake had held her together while she grieved. I'd brought them dinners and sat with Sarah while she cried, never knowing that my own inheritance was paying for their rent and medical expenses. Asterisk, and you never thought to tell me. Even when I was working 90-hour weeks to save for this house. Even when I was eating ramen noodles for dinner so I could put more money aside. Asterisk, you seemed so happy with your success, Sarah said weakly. So proud of what you were accomplishing on your own. I didn't want to diminish that by telling you some of it came from Mom's money. Asterisk, the absurdity of her logic was staggering. She'd robbed me of my inheritance, and then convinced herself she was protecting my pride. But as I stood there looking at her, looking at her, I saw something else. Fear, shame, the same expression she'd worn as a child when she'd broken something valuable and was waiting for the consequences. Asterisk, Sarah, I said more gently, what aren't you telling me? Asterisk, she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, and I saw my little sister as she really was not the successful wife and future mother I'd imagined, but someone who'd been drowning for years and was too proud to ask for help. Asterisk, we're broke, Emma. We've been living paycheck to paycheck for years. Jake's construction business never took off the way we hoped, and I've been working part-time jobs that barely cover groceries. We're 3 months behind on our mortgage. The bank sent us foreclosure papers last week. Asterisk, the final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just about ancient history or family inheritance, this was about Sarah's current desperation. About her watching me celebrate buying a $2 million house while her own home was being taken away. Asterisk, I sank into the chair across from her, feeling suddenly exhausted. So what was your plan here? Tell me the truth at my housewarming party, and hope I'd write you a check. Asterisk, I don't know, she whispered. I wasn't thinking clearly. I've been so scared, and seeing you so happy tonight, knowing I was part of the reason you could afford all this, I just couldn't keep pretending anymore. Asterisk, the rage I'd been feeling began to shift into something more complex. Yes, Sarah had betrayed me, had lied to me for 15 years about something fundamental, but she was also my sister, the only family I had left, and she was falling apart in front of me. Asterisk, I looked around my perfect house at the expensive furniture and professionally hung artwork, at the marble floors and granite countertops that represented years of sacrifice and ambition. For the first time since I'd bought it, the house felt cold and empty, like a beautiful prison I'd built for myself. Asterisk, the money is gone, isn't it? I asked quietly. Even if I forgave you, even if I wanted to, you can't pay me back. Asterisk, Sarah nodded miserably. I'm so sorry, Emma. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I am. I've been sorry every day for 15 years. Asterisk, I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly landscaped yard that had been part of my dream. In the reflection of the glass, I could see Sarah and Jake sitting behind me, waiting for my judgment, waiting to see if I would destroy what was left of our relationship or find some way to forgive the unforgivable. Asterisk, the truth was, I did forgive her, not because what she'd done was acceptable, but because holding on to anger would only hurt me more. The money was gone, the deception was revealed, and I had a choice to make about what came next. Asterisk, I turned back to face them, and for the first time since the revelation, I felt something like peace settling over me. Asterisk, here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. You're going to move in here with me. Both of you. We're going to figure out how to save your house and get your lives back on track. And we're never going to lie to each other again. About anything. Asterisk, Sarah looked up at me with disbelief. Emma, you can't after what I did. Asterisk, you're my sister, I said simply. And this house is big enough for both of us to start over. Asterisk, the house I'd bought as a symbol of my individual success would become something different, a place where family mattered more than pride, where forgiveness was possible even after betrayal, where two sisters who'd lost their way could find each other again. Asterisk, it wasn't the ending I'd planned for my perfect housewarming party. But as I looked at Sarah's tear-streaked face and Jake's grateful expression, I realized it might be the beginning I'd needed all along. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I'd experienced in my adult life. Having Sarah and Jake move into my pristine dream house was like introducing chaos into a carefully orchestrated symphony. Their belongings, mismatched furniture, boxes of memories, Jake's construction tools, disrupted the designer perfection I'd worked so hard to achieve. But slowly, surprisingly, the house began to feel more like a home than it ever had when it was just mine. Sarah threw herself into making amends, with an intensity that was both touching and exhausting. She cooked elaborate meals every night, cleaned obsessively, and insisted on handling all the household management tasks I'd previously done myself. It was her way of trying to earn her place, to prove she deserved the forgiveness I'd offered. But I could see the guilt eating at her, the way she flinched whenever I mentioned money or work, the careful way she moved through spaces that she clearly felt didn't belong to her. Jake, meanwhile, turned out to be unexpectedly handy around the house. Within the first week, he'd fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom that I'd been meaning to call a plumber about, installed better lighting in the garage, and even built custom shelving in the walk-in closet. His presence brought a masculine energy to the house that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Having someone else there to share the daily responsibilities of maintaining such a large property was actually a relief. But the real challenge wasn't practical, it was emotional. Every day brought small reminders of the deception that had shaped my life for 15 years. When Sarah mentioned a vacation she and Jake had taken 5 years ago, I couldn't help wondering if my inheritance money had paid for it. When I looked at the expensive kitchen appliances I'd saved months to afford, I calculated how much sooner I could have bought them if I'd had access to that $25,000 when I needed it most. The hardest part was realizing how the lie had affected more than just money. It had shaped my identity as someone who'd achieved everything through pure determination and sacrifice. Now I had to grapple with the fact that my success story was built partially on a foundation I hadn't even known existed. Had I really earned everything I had, or had my sister's deception inadvertently given me advantages I couldn't see? 3 weeks after the disastrous housewarming party, I came home from work to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread in front of her. Her face was puffy from crying, and she looked up at me with the same expression of shame and fear I'd seen the night she'd confessed. "What's wrong now?" I asked, dropping my briefcase and moving to sit across from her. "I got a call from the lawyer handling Mom's estate," she said quietly. "There's something else I didn't tell you." My stomach dropped. After everything we'd been through, after the forgiveness I'd extended and the new life we were trying to build together, there was more. I felt the familiar surge of anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Tell me." Sarah pushed a legal document across the table, toward me. "Mom didn't just leave me the $50,000. She left me the bakery building, too, the one where she worked all those years. I've been collecting rent from the new owners for the past 3 years." I stared at the document, the words blurring as I tried to process this new betrayal. The bakery where our mother had worked double shifts, where she'd sacrificed her health and happiness to keep us fed and housed, had been generating income for Sarah while I'd been living paycheck to paycheck in my early career years. "How much?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "About $1,800 a month," Sarah whispered. "I used it to supplement Jake's income when his business was slow." The math was devastating. $1,800 a month for 3 years, nearly $65,000 that should have been split between us. Combined with the original inheritance theft, Sarah had essentially stolen close to $90,000 from me over the years. Money that could have changed my life, reduced my stress, allowed me to take risks I'd been too afraid to take. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the marble floor with a harsh sound that made Sarah flinch. "Get out. Emma, please." I said, "Get out. Both of you. Pack your things and get out of my house." Sarah started sobbing again, but this time I felt no sympathy, no desire to comfort her. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness, this was a pattern of lies and deception that stretched back years. She'd looked me in the eye every day for 3 weeks, accepting my forgiveness and my hospitality, while hiding yet another massive secret. "I was going to tell you," she said desperately. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you when. After you'd stolen another $50,000 from me? After you'd bled me dry completely." Jake appeared in the doorway, probably drawn by the sound of raised voices. He took one look at the scene and immediately understood that whatever fragile peace we'd built was now shattered beyond repair. "What's going on?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew it was bad. "Your wife has been stealing rental income from our mother's property for 3 years, I said, not taking my eyes off Sarah. "Money that legally belongs to both of us." Jake's face went white. "Sarah, you said you told her everything. You knew." I turned on him, feeling my anger expand to include him in its scope. "You knew she was stealing from me, and you said nothing. I thought she said she was going to make it right, everyone out. Now, I want you gone by tomorrow morning, and I never want to see either of you again." They left the next morning while I was at work, which was probably for the best. Coming home to their absence was jarring. The house suddenly felt too large and too quiet again, but it was also a relief. I'd grown tired of walking on eggshells in my own home. Tired of measuring every conversation for hidden landmines. Tired of questioning whether Sarah's every gesture of kindness was genuine or guilt-driven. The rental income revelation had broken something in me that couldn't be repaired. It wasn't just about the money, though $90,000 was nothing to dismiss lightly. It was about the systematic nature of Sarah's deception, the way she'd allowed me to struggle and sacrifice, while she benefited from resources that should have been shared. Most painfully, it was about how she'd accepted my forgiveness and generosity while still hiding the full extent of her betrayal. I threw myself into work with a vengeance, staying late every night and coming in early every morning. My colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor, was sharper in meetings, more aggressive in negotiations, less patient with inefficiency. The soft edges that sharing my home with family had given me hardened back into the ruthless focus that had built my career. But the nights were the hardest. Alone in my beautiful house, I was forced to confront the reality of what my life had become. I'd achieved everything I'd thought I wanted: professional success, financial security, a home that was the envy of everyone who saw it, but I was fundamentally alone. My only remaining family member had proven herself to be a liar and a thief, and I'd burned that bridge so thoroughly that there was no way back. A month after Sarah and Jake moved out, I hired a lawyer to explore my legal options regarding the inheritance and rental income. The consultation was depressing but not surprising while Sarah had clearly acted unethically. Proving fraud or theft in family inheritance matters was notoriously difficult, especially after so many years. The lawyer estimated that even if I won a civil suit, the legal fees would likely exceed any damages I might recover. Your best bet is to try to work something out between yourselves, he advised. Family court judges generally prefer mediated settlements to adversarial proceedings in cases like this, but I wasn't interested in mediation or settlement. I wanted justice, consequences, some acknowledgement that what Sarah had done was wrong. The idea of sitting across from her in a conference room, negotiating over money she'd stolen from me, felt like a final humiliation I wasn't prepared to endure. Instead, I decided to take control of the situation in my own way. I contacted the current tenants of the bakery building and informed them that there was a dispute over ownership, suggesting they might want to place their rent payments in escrow until the matter was resolved legally. It was a calculated move, designed to cut off Sarah's income stream and force her to confront the consequences of her actions. Within a week, Sarah was calling my office daily, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that I refused to return. She showed up at my house one evening, pounding on the door and pleading through the intercom system for a chance to explain. I watched her through the security cameras. This woman who looked like my sister but had become a stranger, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction at her distress. The turning point came 6 weeks after I'd kicked them out. I was working late on a Friday evening when my assistant knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before. Mixture of concern and reluctance that immediately put me on alert. "Ms. Morrison, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent and concerns your sister." Jake walked into my office looking like he'd aged 5 years in 6 weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there was a desperate quality to his eyes that made my chest tighten despite my anger. Emma. Please, I need 5 minutes. Sarah doesn't know I'm here. I considered having security escort him out, but something in his manner stopped me. You have 5 minutes. Sarah's in the hospital, he said without preamble. She had a breakdown 3 days ago. Complete nervous collapse. The doctors say it's from stress and guilt, and they're not sure when she'd be stable enough to come home. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain impassive. That's unfortunate, but I don't see how it concerns me. She's been obsessing over what she did to you. She hasn't slept more than 2 hours a night since we moved out. She's lost 15 pounds, and she keeps talking about how she destroyed the only family she had left. Emma, she's suicidal. The room went very quiet. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic from the street below, the ticking of the antique clock on my bookshelf. Everything else faded away as I processed what Jake was telling me. She made her choices, I said finally, though my voice sounded strange even to me. She did. And she knows that. But she's also your sister, and she's falling apart. The guilt is eating her alive, and I don't know how to help her anymore. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Sarah was lying in a hospital bed, consumed by remorse for what she'd done to me. The vindictive part of me felt satisfied she deserved to suffer after what she'd put me through. But a larger part of me, the part that remembered, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, felt only sadness. What do you want from me, Jake? I want you to forgive her. Really forgive her. Not the conditional forgiveness you offered before. She needs to know that you don't hate her, that there's some possibility of rebuilding what you two had. After everything she's done. After all the lies. Because of everything she's done. Because she's family, and because losing you is destroying her more effectively than any punishment you could devise. I visited Sarah in the hospital on a Tuesday morning, choosing a time when I knew Jake would be at work so we could talk privately. The psychiatric ward was nothing like the medical hospitals I'd been in before. Everything was designed to be soothing and non-threatening, with soft colors and rounded edges that spoke to the fragile mental state of the patients housed there. Sarah was sitting by the window in her room, staring out at the parking lot with vacant eyes. She'd lost more weight than Jake had mentioned, and her hair hung limp and unwashed around her face. When she turned and saw me standing in the doorway, her expression went through a series of emotions: surprise, hope, fear, and finally resignation. I didn't think you'd come, she said quietly. I almost didn't. I sat in the chair across from her, maintaining distance while trying to assess her mental state. She looked fragile in a way I'd never seen before. Like a strong wind might blow her away entirely. Jake told me what happened. How are you feeling? She laughed bitterly. Like I've ruined everything that mattered to me. Like I'm exactly the kind of person Mom always worried I'd become selfish and weak and unable to take responsibility for my actions. Mom never thought that about you. Didn't she? Then why did she leave me everything and you nothing? She knew I couldn't be trusted to do the right thing, so she made me the executor, thinking I'd take care of you. Instead, I proved her right by taking care of only myself. I'd never considered this interpretation of our mother's decision, but it rang true in a way that was almost painful. Mom had always seen Sarah as the one who needed protecting, but maybe she'd also seen her as the one who needed to learn responsibility, by making her the steward of the inheritance. Maybe Mom had been trying to teach Sarah to put family first. Sarah. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Was there ever a moment, over all these years, when you planned to tell me about the money? She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. No. I kept telling myself I would, but deep down, I think I always knew I wouldn't. I was too ashamed, and it got easier to justify as time went on. You were doing so well, and we were struggling, and it felt like the money was being put to better use helping us survive than sitting in your already growing savings account. The honesty was brutal but also somehow cleansing. After months of partial truths and defensive justifications, Sarah was finally being completely honest about her motivations. Do you understand why that makes everything worse? I could have forgiven a mistake, even a big one, but this was a calculated decision you made every day for 15 years. I know, and I hate myself for it. I hate what I've become, what I've done to us, what I've taken from you. Emma, you were my hero growing up. You were everything I wanted to be: strong and smart and determined. And instead of trying to be worthy of your respect, I stole from you and lied to you and destroyed the one relationship that mattered most to me. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she made no effort to wipe them away. She looked defeated in a way that was genuinely frightening, like she'd given up on the possibility of redemption. The money isn't what hurts the most, I found myself saying, surprised by my own words. It's the trust. You were the one person I thought would never lie to me, never betray me. Losing that feels worse than losing $90,000. I know I can't fix it. I know I can't earn back your trust or undo what I've done. But Emma, I need you to know that every single day for the past 15 years, I've thought about telling you the truth. And every single day, I've hated myself a little more for being too much of a coward to do it. I studied her face, really looked at her for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Underneath the guilt and shame and self-loathing, I could still see my little sister, the girl who used to bring me wildflowers she'd picked from vacant lots, who'd saved her allowance to buy me a birthday present when we were kids, who'd held my hand at Mom's funeral and promised we'd always have each other. Sarah, what do you want from me? What would make this right in your mind? I want to give you the building. I want to sign over my rights to the rental income. I want to pay you back every penny I can, even if it takes the rest of my life. But more than that, I want my sister back. I want the chance to prove that I'm not the selfish, lying person I've been. I want to deserve your forgiveness instead of just begging for it. The offer surprised me. Signing over the building would mean giving up their primary source of supplemental income, leaving them even deeper in financial trouble than they already were. It would be a genuine sacrifice, not just words or promises. And if I said yes? If I accepted the building and the rental income, what then? Then maybe I could start learning to live with what I've done. Maybe I could find a way to rebuild myself into someone you could be proud to call your sister again. I sat in that hospital room for another hour, talking with Sarah about our childhood, our mother, the dreams we'd had as kids. Slowly, I began to see the path forward, not back to the relationship we'd had before, which had been built on a foundation of lies, but towards something new and more honest. I'm not ready to forgive you completely, I told her as I prepared to leave, but I'm willing to try to rebuild what we had, if you're willing to do the work to earn it back. Sarah nodded eagerly. hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since I'd arrived. "I'll do whatever it takes, I promise. Asterisk no more promises, Sarah. Just actions. Show me who you want to be instead of telling me." 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my dream house, watching Sarah cook dinner while Jake repaired a cabinet door that had been sticking. They'd moved back in 3 weeks. After Sarah was discharged from the hospital, and this time, everything was different. There were no secrets between us, no careful conversations around dangerous topics, no walking on eggshells or unspoken resentments. Sarah had kept her word about the building, signing over full ownership to me in a ceremony that felt more like a funeral than a legal proceeding. The rental income now flowing directly to my accounts was more than enough to cover the additional expenses of having them live with me. More importantly, it represented Sarah's commitment to making amends through actions rather than just words. The changes in both of them had been remarkable to witness. Without the crushing secret she'd carried for 15 years. Sarah seemed lighter, more like the sister I remembered from our childhood. She'd found a full-time job as an office manager at a local nonprofit, insisting on contributing to household expenses even though it wasn't necessary. Jake's construction business had finally begun to turn a profit. Aided by referrals from my professional network and the stability that came from not worrying about losing their home. But the most significant change was in our relationship itself. We really talked about everything from our childhood memories to our fears about the future. Sarah had started seeing a therapist to work through the guilt and shame that had nearly destroyed her. And I'd begun going to sessions with her to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by her deception. The therapy sessions had been brutal at first. Sitting in that neutral office space, rehashing 15 years of lies and missed opportunities, had felt like picking at wounds that were trying to heal. Dr. Martinez, our counselor, had a way of asking questions that forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and each other. Why had I been so invested in my image as someone who'd achieved everything alone? Why had Sarah found it easier to lie than to admit she needed help? How had we both contributed to a dynamic where honesty felt impossible? Slowly, painfully, we'd begun to understand that our mother's death had affected us more profoundly than either of us had realized. I'd thrown myself into work and success as a way of honoring her memory, trying to prove that her sacrifices hadn't been in vain. Sarah had crumbled under the weight of being the one who needed help, ashamed that she couldn't live up to the independence our mother had modeled for us. "You know," Sarah said, stirring the sauce she was making for dinner, "I never thanked you properly for not letting me die in that hospital room." "You weren't going to die, Sarah. Maybe not physically, but the person I was before, the liar, the thief, the coward who'd rather let her sister suffer than face the truth she needed to die. You gave me the chance to become someone better." I smiled, remembering the broken woman I'd visited in the psychiatric ward and comparing her to the confident, honest person standing in front of me now. "You did the work yourself. I just gave you the opportunity. Still, I know it would have been easier to write me off completely. Most people would have." "You're not most people, you're my sister." The truth was, cutting Sarah out of my life completely had never really been an option, despite my anger and hurt. She was the only person who remembered our childhood the way I did, who understood the significance of escaping the cramped apartment above the bakery, who could look at this house and truly comprehend what it represented. Losing her would have meant losing the only witness to my journey, the only person who could validate how far I'd come. But more than that, I'd come to realize that my own perfectionism had played a role in creating the conditions for Sarah's deception. I'd been so proud of my independence, so invested in the narrative of my self-made success, that I'd inadvertently made it clear that needing help was a weakness. Sarah had internalized that message and chosen to steal rather than admit she was struggling. The house that had once felt like a monument to my individual achievement now felt like a home in the truest sense, a place where people who loved each other could weather storms together, could fail and be forgiven, could grow and change and become better versions of themselves. The formal dining room where I'd once imagined hosting elegant dinner parties now echoed with Sarah's laughter and Jake's terrible jokes. The pristine guest bedrooms had become lived-in spaces full of books and personal belongings and the comfortable mess of daily life. 3 months ago, we'd hosted our first real dinner party since the disastrous housewarming. Sarah had been terrified that people would remember the scene she'd caused. But I'd insisted it was time to reclaim our narrative. We'd invited my closest colleagues, a few neighbors, and some of Sarah and Jake's friends. creating a guest list that reflected our new reality as a chosen family rather than just my professional network. The evening had been nothing like the careful perfection of that first party. Sarah had burned the appetizers slightly. Jake had spilled wine on his shirt during the toast, and I'd found myself laughing more than I had in years. When one of my colleagues asked about the family dynamics, clearly curious about why my sister and brother-in-law were living with me, simply said that we'd discovered family was more important than pride. The honest answer had felt better than any carefully crafted explanation. As we sat down to dinner that night, I looked around the table at the unlikely family we'd assembled: Sarah and Jake, scarred but healing, and me, successful but no longer alone. The dream house I'd bought for $2 million had become something far more valuable. A place where love was stronger than betrayal, where forgiveness was possible even after devastating hurt, where family meant choosing each other every day despite everything that had gone wrong. "I have news," Sarah announced as we began eating, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and nervousness that immediately caught my attention. "Good news or bad news?" I asked, though her expression suggested it was positive. "Good news. Great news, actually." She reached across the table and took Jake's hand, her face glowing with a joy I hadn't seen since before our mother died. "We're pregnant." The words hit me like a physical force, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Sarah was going to have a baby. Our family was going to grow, expand beyond the careful triangle we'd constructed over the past 6 months. The child would grow up in this house, would crawl across these marble floors and learn to walk in these hallways, would never know the cramped apartment or the financial stress that had shaped Sarah's and my childhoods. "Oh my God," I whispered, tears springing to my eyes. "Sarah, that's incredible." "We wanted to tell you first," Jake said, his own eyes wet with emotion, "before we told anyone else. Because this baby is going to grow up knowing that family means everything, that people make mistakes but love endures, that this house is home because of the people in it, not because of what it cost." I stood up and walked around the table to hug them both, feeling something I'd never experienced before. The overwhelming joy of knowing that my choices had created something bigger than myself. This child would grow up with advantages I'd never had, but more importantly, they'd grow up with the knowledge that family was worth fighting for, worth forgiving for, worth rebuilding from the ground up when necessary. Sarah raised her water glass in a toast, her eyes bright with tears that were happy for the first time in years. "2 second chances," she said simply. "2 second chances," Jake and I echoed, clinking our glasses together. But as I looked around the table at the faces of the people I loved most in the world, I realized it wasn't just about second chances anymore. It was about the infinite possibility of renewal, the way families could break and heal and become stronger in the broken places. The baby would be born into a family that had tested the limits of forgiveness and discovered that love really could conquer the worst betrayals. Outside, the sun was setting over the perfectly manicured garden I'd once seen as proof of my success. But inside, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I realized I'd found something even better than the dream I'd worked so hard to achieve. I'd found my way home. And now I was helping to create a home for the next generation, a place where honesty was valued over perfection, where mistakes were learning opportunities rather than sources of shame, where family meant choosing each other every single day. The house would soon echo with different sounds: a baby's cries, first words, the patter of small feet on marble floors that had once symbolized my solitary success. And I couldn't wait.